Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters.
Greetings, Cretans.
Here we are live again this Wednesday on Facebook. We're going to do this pretty much most Wednesdays. I think there's one Wednesday we're missing in October, and we'll actually have a Thursday event that will be with Cincinnati Ale Infusers. CCAI.
There you go.
No, I'm probably totally wrong. I just screwed it up. You know who else screws things up?
Our good friend,
John Blickman. Absolutely. Yeah. He, that's the thing about a brilliant engineering mind is that, you screw things up as you try and create new things or solve problems. One of the ways that you actually solve an engineering problem is to try things and see what breaks and see what changes. And you make little changes and you see what the results are. And based on that, you can make decisions on, what has what effect, and you work your way through a problem that way. And that's one of the things about, we always talked about how, a lot of great brewers were in engineering, had some sort of an engineering bent to them, because engineering is problem solving. Engineering is logical problem solving. That's all engineering is. You understand all your inputs, you understand all your possible solutions, or the technologies you can use, and then you apply those and see what happens, and you solve the problem. That's why using the same thing in homebrewing is quite useful as well. Anyways, our good friend John Blickman, he has used that to create probably the finest homebrew equipment you can possibly get, and commercial equipment. They have that available, blickmanengineering.com. Check them out. Lots of great stuff. He's been paying for the show too, so you don't have to for the last 15 years. So check him out. Do me a favor, send John Blickman an email. You can reach him, feedback@blickmanengineering.com. Tell him how much you appreciate him doing this show or paying for the show so we can do it for you. And yada, yada. There you go. Ask for Blickman Engineering at your local homebrew shop. Today, we want to talk about Kveik Yeasts. There's a lot of questions, a lot of interest in them. And we have our guest, Richard Priest from Escarpment. He's co-founder of Escarpment Laboratories, which is a yeast company for craft brewers. The company's based in Ontario, Canada. Richard has a master's in molecular biology and genetics. He leads the R&D efforts of the company, and he's focused on creating new products and better solutions for brewers. He knows a lot about Kveik Yeast, and so that's why we're having him on today. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me to be on here. It's an honor.
Yeah, this is
it's a pleasure to have you here.
For the past decade and a half, we've been doing the show. I'll say that. Let me give us that bonus right there.
Yeah. But I've enjoyed seeing your talks, Richard, in Canada and here in the States and with the World Brewing Congress. And so it's great to actually have you on our show as well.
Awesome. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Richard, before we get started, tell me a little bit about Escarpment. When did you guys start, and how's things going for you?
Yeah, we started in 2015, so we're still not that old, as far as the beer world goes. But maybe we're kind of old as far as craft beer goes with the explosion of new breweries that popped up. So, starting a yeast company in Canada 2015 does kind of feel like it was the right place at the right time. We were able to start ourselves up and start figuring out how to make large quantities of good quality yeast and get it out to all the Canadian brewers we possibly could for the next 5 years. And that's still we're working on that, and it's also afforded us some of these opportunities to really sort of push at the edges with yeast and try to develop and identify some new interesting things for the yeast world as well. And that's what's really inspiring to us, is seeing all of the science that happens around beer, yeast and all the other ingredients, malt and hops, and all the cool stuff that's happening behind the scenes to make make more flavors and make brewing easier and better and improve quality. And really happy to sort of fit in with that as time goes on.
Great.
And your name, Escarpment, is that a metaphor, or is it a geological feature? Or?
Yeah, it's a fancy word for a cliff. And yeah, maybe it could, running a small business often feels like you're teetering over the edge of the cliff at any given moment. So maybe in some ways it is a metaphor. But no, we named it after the Niagara Escarpment, which is a key geographical feature in our region in southern Ontario. Okay. It's sort of this big cliff or ridge that really sort of bifurcates the province. So, you have to drive over it or around it if you're going anywhere pretty much. And when we started our company, our goal was to, sort of be rooted in place and have, a name that ties us to Ontario. And we're pretty happy about that. That being said, then now we get into these situations where it's explaining, what the heck this means to everyone else.
Now, have you brewed ever? Were you home brewer, or how did you get into this?
Yeah, I was a home brewer, so were my business partners. That's really how we got into this, was being lab geeks and home brewing geeks, and realizing we could combine the two and stop paying for yeast, and eventually realized that we could also do this and give it to the breweries and maybe get some free beer out of it. So yeah, I definitely come from the context of having homebrewed for a few years before getting into this, and certainly learning quite a lot from the two of you.
Good.
Nice.
So credit where credit's due.
All right. So let's jump into right off the bat, Kveik Yeast. The thing that I answer a lot of questions about it, and I've dabbled in it a bit. And the thing that seems to be happening, at least online, is people are declaring Kveik to be a miracle yeast, a cure-all for clean fermentation at any temperature. No need to use lager yeast, no yeast need to use cal ale. Kveik at 110 degrees Fahrenheit is 100% lager like. Is that true? I mean, is it the cure all?
I wouldn't describe it as a cure all, but I do think that because of some of the special properties of Kveik, it can do a lot of really cool things, and it is the family of yeast is a super versatile tool for brewers, in the sense that it is possible to make a clean beer at those really hot temperatures with Kveik, where you might struggle with a different yeast. It is possible to make something more lager-like if you have the right strain and the right conditions. So I'm not going to say that it solves every brewing problem, because it doesn't. But it's a really versatile tool, and it's sort of my hope is that once some of the hype about this, special yeast that ferments at 110 degrees dies down, that we all accept it as a really useful tool in our toolbox for making great beers.
So Do all Kveik yeasts ferment clean? Low ester, or are there different strains?
No, there's a lot of diversity. So, as a family of yeast, it's very genetically diverse. I mean, I'm always going to go back to genetics as a lab nerd myself, but what that means is that you have a lot of diversity in the types of behaviors that the yeast have as well. So you might have some Kveiks that are very, very clean across the board, other ones that are very, very fruity and expressive, and even other ones that might be clean at one temperature or one condition, or really fruity at another temperature. So there's quite a lot of variability across the whole family.
Yeah, some years back, some folks in Norway gave Tasty McDole 5 or 6 yeasts, and he brought them back, and then I grew them up in my lab, and we did some test fermentations and tastes of it, and they were all over the board. I mean, there was a clean one. There was one that tasted more like a German Hef. There's one that tastes more like a Belgian ale. There's one that tastes more like an English ale. I mean, they were all over the board, and I didn't really think any of them as being really clean. I thought all of them was like, they had different characters. One was kind of saison-like. And so I began to wonder if, the origin of some of these yeasts might not have been from, one of these other areas where some brewer in Norway, 150 years ago went and got some yeast, a pitch yeast from some brewery in Germany or, in England, and took it back, and now it's kind of become, these are Kveik yeasts. And so is Kveik truly a different genetic strain, or does it have origins? Has the history or the path of Kveik yeast been traced back like they've done on some other yeast? And they're all ale strains, correct?
Yeah, they're all ale strains. So it's all just Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's not like a lager yeast or anything like that. Mm-hmm. We were able to do some genetic work with Kveik and published a paper back in 2018. And what we found at the time was that there was a pretty distinct genetic makeup for Kveik. It wasn't, just neatly fit into any of the other yeast families. And the other important thing was that all the Kveiks that we sequenced were kind of nestled within the same family. So that gave some support for the idea that there is a genetic family of Kveik, and that thus far has remained supported as more of them get sequenced. That being said, where it came from, I think, is still an open question. It's harder to trace that back. We were able to find that it appears to be a result of a hybridization of the standard brewing yeast family, that pretty much everything like Weizen yeasts and like English ale yeasts and American yeast come from. It's pretty clear that that's one of the parents of Kveik is, something presumably mainstream and European. But then we also, had some suggestion that there's some other parental line that was a lot harder to figure out. It appeared to trace back a little bit further in history. So that still remains a bit of a scientific mystery, but we can definitely say that it is a distinct family of yeast if we look at the genetics. And that's helpful too, because then, as more of these traditional yeasts are discovered, we can, make those comparisons and plug new strains in to that family tree. But that's the kind of cool thing is, you might have some that taste like other types of yeast, but as long as it is Kveik and has that history of being passed down through generations, it tends to be the real thing.
Okay. Let's do this. Let's take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk more about Kveik yeasts, temperatures, pitching rates, all that stuff that you guys want to know right after this.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on two gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high-temperature March pump, and either a top-tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking with Richard Priest from Escarpment Laboratories in Canada, a yeast company that develops a lot of really cool, interesting things. I checked out your website and saw like a really interesting array of yeasts. You even make some lager yeasts, and one of the questions that people have all the time is, can I make a lager with Kveik Yeast?
Yeah, this is one of my struggles is the answer that I'll give is yes, but it might not taste exactly like the results that you're going to get from a lager yeast.
I think we need to define lager like. What do we mean when we say, can we make a lager? What does that imply?
Clean, a bit of sulfur. Lager.
And what do we mean by clean?
Low ester. Low diacetyl. The thing about lagers is the lager yeast. People have unfortunately put lager the idea of lager as lacking in any ale characteristics, getting rid of the fruity and all that stuff is still there in different compounds, different layers, and there's other compounds that become more pronounced, and that is a lager. So lager is not the absence of flavor. Lager is a different set of flavors. And most ale yeasts are not able to produce the flavors in the ratios needed for it to taste lager-like. And that's why, personally, I believe, no, you can't make a lager with Kveik yeast. It's the same. You might as well use, 001 and do that. Call that a lager. It's not a lager. It's not a lager unless you use the lager yeast, I think. But that's me. I'm an old curmudgeon. So the question was for you, Richard. What do you think? I mean, you can try it. It's going to be different, and it may get cleaner, but it's not going to be a lager.
I think you can get very close. I think you're absolutely correct that there are these subtle configurations of flavor. I'm going to steal that term, that make a lager yeast, and a lot of it comes down to what does it do to highlight the malt and the hops? What does it do in subtle ways a lot of the times to sort of highlight the other ingredients? Like lager yeast kind of does elevate the other ingredients rather than being the star itself. I think with Kveik, with the right strains, their products, and the right conditions, you can get very close. And I think the benefit there is that you can do it at a much faster rate, right? We've done experiments where we've been able to make a pseudo lager using Kveik grain to glass in less than 7 days, and I'll tell you, yeah, the result is I don't like the result as much as a proper lager that's taken 6 weeks, but the Kveik one took 6 days, right? So there's trade-offs always, right? And I think you can get very close. Some of these strains can produce a little bit of that volatile sulfur that's sort of characteristic of lager yeasts. By dialing in the temperature and the pitching rate, you can suppress the esters. By managing the fermentation, you can sort of preserve those malt aromas. So I think it is possible to get close, but you're right. It's lager yeast is a totally different beast. It's genetically a really special thing, and it's really hard for ale yeast to exactly replicate it. But yeah, you can make some very nice lager-like beers with Kveik.
Now, what about pitch rate? We talk about pitch rate a lot, but how important is pitch rate for Kveik yeast? Some people say you should pitch less because you could overpitch Kveik yeast. Yeah,
that's always been, I think, a matter of debate, and it comes down to the traditional method involving pitching a really low pitch rate, right? A few little flakes of yeast tossed into the wort. So we did put that to the test. We shared some of that November last year, and basically tested 4 different Kveiks at 3 different pitch rates. And what we found was that for 2 of the 4, it made a difference in terms of the aromatics, and for the other 2, it didn't seem to make a difference. So it might actually be a strain specific phenomenon. What I've found in practice versus in the lab is that when Kveik is seriously overpitched, it does tend to diminish the aromatics, but if it's pitched at a standard, what I would call a standard ale pitch rate, or half or a quarter of that, it tends to perform and shine pretty well within that range. It's really when it's like seriously overpitched that you tend to really suppress the pleasant aromatics and kind of just get more of the bread crust and floral kind of aromas out.
Which is true of just about any yeast. When I've tried this in the past, you really had to go nuts on the pitching in order to really overpitch. Overpitching is very difficult to achieve in most cases. And underpitching a little bit is fine in most cases. The yeast is pretty flexible. It's when you seriously don't provide enough yeast that you really run into issues with brewing, I think. So what would be your recommended pitch rate for most Kveik yeasts? And feel free to call out the 2 weird ones that need a different pitch rate.
Yeah, if I recall, in general, what I tend to go with personally is somewhere between traditional and normal, right? Traditional being about 1 million cells per mil, just straight up, and normal ale pitching rate being 7 to 10 million cells per mil. I personally tend to shoot for somewhere in the middle. So, at the homebrew scale, that would be basically half a pouch. So you can use half of the pouch and save the other half for the next brew.
On a 18, 20 liter, 5 gallon batch?
On a 5 gallon batch, yeah.
Okay. Jimmy Jacobson, he's asking, would the cleaner cultures, I guess the Kveik cultures, work better with the classic hop profiles, noble hop varieties?
Yes, absolutely.
Most of the mainstream cultures available seem to mesh well with newer hops and the flavors that the yeast provides.
Yeah, and sort of just going back to the idea that I think Kveik will settle in as a really useful tool that's available to everyone is it does work with a lot of different ingredients, and depending on the strain that you choose, you can do a lot of different things with it. You can do traditional English beers with it, depending on the other ingredients you choose. So if you're doing a pseudo lager with a Kveik, definitely you want to use those traditional hops that would be in a great lager. Sots or Tettnang or whatever you want to use, I think those could mesh really well, especially if you've got a strain that's a little bit more neutral.
Okay, another thing that I see on the interwebs is the question of how hot you can ferment with Kveik. And my personal experience with most yeast is that they start to shut down around 95 Fahrenheit. You can get into the 90s, but they start to slow down. You get past 95, and they really just generally don't want to ferment. What is the case with Kveik? I've heard people say, "Oh, I fermented at 109 and it was fine." I'm imagining, okay, so their room was 109, but maybe the wort was not quite at 109, and that it had started fermenting earlier, pretty much ripped through it, and all they saw was CO2 being evolved. Have you tested in the lab exactly how high and how low a temperature Kveik can ferment at?
Yes, yeah, we did.
Nice.
So we have tested a number. I'm not going to say we've tested every Kveik, but we've tested a number of them, and it seems like the upper bound for most of them is about 42, 43 Celsius, so 108 to 110 Fahrenheit. None of them were able to grow or ferment at 45, so that's absolute max. But yeah, up to pretty steamy temperatures, they will be active. That's not necessarily the optimum in terms of performance, but a lot of them will tolerate those crazy high temperatures.
Oh, that's amazing. Pete is asking on when you're harvesting Kveik. I've heard some people saying they dry harvested yeast. Is this necessary or beneficial or not needed at all?
Okay, so the traditional approach that's taken for most of the brewers in Norway, where the cultures come from, is to harvest the yeast, either top crop it or bottom crop it, and dry it out, on a piece of parchment paper, in the oven with the light on, kind of thing. So that you end up with dry yeast that you can then, use in the future. You don't have to. You can crop liquid yeast and store it and still reap the benefits of the pretty amazing stress tolerance. First of all, it is amazing that these yeasts are so tolerant of drying. But second of all, we've seen liquid slurries that have been 90% viability at 6 months or longer. So either way, they're pretty good at resisting stress and surviving. So I would be very comfortable, keeping a liquid slurry sample of Kveik and reusing it 6-8 months later. Maybe make a little starter just to double check, but they're pretty resilient.
Now, if you do dry out the yeast, I assume unless you are very careful or put in a hood or some way of isolating it, you probably get some bacteria, other wild yeast landing on it as well.
A little bit. The nice thing about the drying is that it's a pretty strong selective environment, and a lot of microbes aren't good at drying out like that. So, yeah, in some ways you've got this open environment where bacteria and things like wild yeast can end up. But at the same time, if you're reducing the water content, then a lot of things just won't survive. So,
have you had makgeolli from Korea?
We have had some makgeolli enter our lab and plated it out and seen the whirlwind of microbes that are in there.
Right.
So sometimes bacteria can survive drying.
It's like a dried rice cake thing with, it's just amazing. I love it. I've really become a fan. You spend enough time in Korea, you drink enough, you start to love makgeolli. It's just one of those things. All right. Let's see here. All right, we got time for one more before we go to another break. Jimmy is asking, is it better to refer to them as different strains or different cultures, or does it matter? Especially in reference to the original farmhouse instead of isolated strains.
Yeah, it does get complicated because we have original cultures that come from farmhouse brewers in Norway, and those have a name, usually the name of the person or the farm. And then what yeast companies are often selling is isolates or a blend of isolates from those original cultures. So maybe isolates is my way of getting around strains as a name here, but it does get a little complicated because a lot of the products that are available are blends of multiple strains or multiple isolates that are not necessarily representative of the original cultures. So it is a little bit tricky. I know the writer who's really been pushing a lot of this knowledge, Lars Marius Garsal, he's got a Kveik registry. I know he just published about that in the Master Brewers Technical Quarterly. So I would recommend checking that out. That paper helps to sort of explain a lot of this, a lot of these definitions as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think a lot of, the flavor and culture and why, when we tested these in the lab and isolated out, the various yeast that we were given from Norway, we've got, interesting flavors, some horrible flavors, but when you just took a chunk of the dried material and fermented that, I think most of the times it tasted better. And I think, sometimes it's the production of acid from, the one thing or another, or the production of, certain flavors. It's the whole becomes, more than the sum of its parts. When you break that out and isolate them out into pure cultures, you can't just pick one and say, oh yeah, I'm just going with that. It really depended in the field, in the farmhouse, on all of that. One of my favorite breweries in the world is Harvey's in England. And I was there and they were telling me about how they had some years ago their yeast plated out. And they said, yeah, there were 9 organisms in there. And so they get it, grown up, and it's stored for them. But there's 9 organisms in there. If you were to take one of those yeasts and brew something with it, it's not Harvey's. You're not going to get that same flavor. You need all 9 of them there in kind of a weird blend. And I wonder if a lot of the traditional Kveik yeast things were based off of this collection of flavors, not one isolated yeast. And we're phobically focused on this pure yeast thing.
Yeah, I didn't think we were going to get this philosophical, but yeah, this is super important.
I've been drinking.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at yeast in brewing before people like me came along, it was all these mixed cultures like Kveik, or like what Harvey's uses, where people had yeast, but it wasn't purified. So whatever they had was typically a mixture of different strains. It may be all Saccharomyces. It may make clean beers, but it probably wasn't just a single strain. And that changed when Carlsberg started developing single strain culture, and that kind of just spread like wildfire. Maybe one of my hopes is that Kveik kind of wakes us up to this idea that in some ways these communities of yeast can produce better results or interesting results that are sort of worth exploration, and force some of the lab people like myself to sort of rethink our approach to pure culture and figure out how the heck we can produce products that have 9 or 10 yeasts in them and ensure consistency.
Yeah. Well, there you go. All right. Bonus fun fact that I found on the internet was Kveik is not actually the word that all Norwegians use to refer to their traditional farmhouse yeast blends, even though it has recently come into that use for the rest of us in order to keep things simple. In Norway, people in different regions call their yeast by a variety of names, including yeast, yester, young, and farm, among other things. But that's because pretty confusing, and so we all us Americans and North Americans, and probably South Americans, are using Kveik as what we call it. All right, let's take another short break. When we come back, we will talk more Kveik, including aeration and other things, right after this.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're here with Richard Priest from Escarpment Laboratories. He's their lead on R&D and other efforts. And he has a great deal of knowledge about Kveik Yeast, and he is sharing that with us today. I'll tell you this. One of the things that I think radically changes how a yeast performs is the level of aeration, nutrients, things like that. The substrate that they have to work with will dramatically change the results you get. You can take the same yeast and you can give it 10 different environments and you get 10 completely different results where you would say it's different yeast. On the Kveik yeast, how does it respond to things like aeration, or do you need to aerate Kveik yeast?
Yes, you absolutely do. And you have to consider that the context that the yeast has been used in for, at least hundreds of years is open fermentation. And that may mean that a yeast has more access to oxygen than it would in a closed fermenter, not only on the homebrew side in a carboy, but especially when you get on the pro brewery side as well. And, big tanks. So what we've seen is that Kveik benefits quite a lot from lots of oxygen up front, just like a lot of the yeasts that are being used for popular beer styles now. The yeasts that are used for hazy IPAs are no different. They also have higher oxygen requirements than the Cal Ale that we were all trained on.
Right.
So it's really important.
Okay, so you must aerate it. And what about other things like zinc? Do we need to worry about zinc, free amino nitrogen, other stuff? How does it respond? I thought I read something on your site about perhaps a need for additional free amino nitrogen on some strains and some worts.
Yeah, it rarely hurts unless you're adding way too much nutrient. Kveik do have above average requirements for free amino nitrogen. So, that is why, for example, they perform so well in high gravity beers, because if you're doing an all grain high gravity beer, you're already getting tons and tons of nutrients out of those, out of that malt. And, especially if we look back, a year or two in the past, a lot of our troubleshooting had to do with Kveik in lower gravity beers, right? If you're, something 1050 or below. And when we worked with those brewers, it was often, try adding some nutrient, and that often helps quite a lot to prevent it from slow or stalled fermentations. So the nutrition is really important. It's nothing special. It's just make sure that it gets enough of that free amino nitrogen.
Well, that's fascinating, because every time I think about farmhouse yeast or something, that somebody that was using horses as their horsepower was brewing, I always tend to think, well, they were probably doing something lower gravity. Because one, it's difficult to get a really high gravity wort out of, poorly kilned malt and out on the farm. I mean, and you didn't want, 10% ABV beers when you're working with sharp implements that can slice your legs off. So everything was pretty much probably lower ABV, and that's why most of the farmhouse things work with lower ABV well. But you're saying it's different.
These are Norwegian farmers. That's the thing.
Yeah. It all comes down to culture. It all comes down to the context of the people that are brewing the beer. And so,
Are you saying Norwegians are a bunch of alcoholics?
I'm saying Norwegians are a bunch of binge drinkers.
Yes, they are.
It comes down to culture,
wonderful
right?
People.
If you're a culture like Denmark, where there's the regular low alcohol beer consumption, then those are the kinds of beers that get brewed. Historically, Norway was more so skewed towards alcohol consumption for celebrations. So people would brew for Christmas and weddings. Maybe Easter and things like that. So consequently, brewing was not something you did for everyday nutrition. It was something you did to show off. So yeah, you're going to make something high octane and crazy, because
Nice.
it shows that you have the disposable income to use your grain to make beer rather than feeding your family.
Well, I mean, I may represent that remark, but yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Wendy was asking, which is your favorite strain? We got great results using Midburst in our Cray Cray IPA.
Cool. We'll be releasing Midbust as our we'll talk about Kveik Ring later on, but as our Kveik Ring release next month. So watch out for that. I still really like Hornindal. I think there's a ton of applications for Hornindal. It's also one that is pretty widely available in different formats. You can do a lot of different things with it. So yeah, if you sort of underpitch and ferment hotter, you can get a lot of tropical fruit aromas out of it. So it works really well in IPAs and things like that. Or if you pitch a little bit more and decrease the temperature, you can get clean results as well. So I like it for Kolsch style things as well. Just really versatile.
Now, given the fact that most of these Kveik yeasts are, traditionally were dried and stored dry and clearly survive that treatment, why are the dry yeast companies not jumping on Kveiks and making a lot of Kveik packets out there?
Oh, they are. Yeah. I still remember, I think it was a couple years ago, one of the guys from Lallemand coming up to me after a talk and saying, thanks for doing the research. We're very excited about Kveik. Wink, wink. So I think we've already seen that, right? Lallemand's got a Voss on the market, and I'm sure everyone else is working on something because why wouldn't they be? It makes a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, because I recall, part of the struggle in the past was certain strains wouldn't dry that well and survive, and so they had to limit their offerings to certain yeasts.
Yeah, it's a bottleneck.
Right. How does Kveik yeast impact hops or malt? The bittering, the aroma, residual malt character. What exactly is going on there? Is different strains, different things, or they all tend to go one way?
The simple answer is different strains, different things. When you look at hops, some of them are more or less capable of biotransformation than others. We're still researching that, but there are some that are really good at it, some that barely touch the hops, depending on what you're looking for. Some of them might enhance or diminish the bitterness as well. There's a pretty big range there. So that is one of the things that I usually suggest people that are making pseudo lagers with Kveik is bump up the bitterness a little bit, because the yeast itself is going to make that beer have a slightly more sweet perception, and that can often help to balance out those beers.
Is there one strain you'd recommend for something if you're going for something that was hoppy? Is there a Kveik that you would recommend for that?
We really like Evergarden for that. That is one of the our product is a blend of two strains. It has really high biotransformation capacity, sort of in that medium flocculation range, like a lot of the yeast that are used for really fruity IPAs. So tends to work really well in those applications.
And the one you would recommend for the most lager-like?
Yeah, we have a product that we launched in April that we call Crispy.
Right. The Crispy.
Yeah, the Crispy.
It's a blend.
It is a blend. It's a blend of two strains that came from a Kveik called Scara that we had released just sort of as a test and got some really great feedback on it. So that motivated us to tweak it. And we ended up just pulling out one strain that was a little fruitier and less flocculent, so that we had something, a blend of two strains that sort of gives that clean and quick ferment and good flocculation.
Now, what temperature do you recommend for that strain?
For clean results, we tend to suggest 20 to 25 C, so 72 to 78 Fahrenheit. I think that's what it is.
Yep.
You can go hotter; it just starts to get some tropical fruit aromas.
If you wanted to make a tropical fruity juicy IPA, what strain, what temperature?
Ebegarden, 30 Celsius, which is 90 Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what are you drinking? It looks purple in a kind of a tulipy glass.
Yeah, I've got a beer from a brewery called Lone Oak Brewing Company in Prince Edward Island. They sent us a box of beer, and I was just reading my fridge this afternoon and thought I would pull this out. So I'm actually not sure if this is fermented with Kveik, but I know that they use some of our products to ferment their beer, and it's a new brewery, so I wanted to give them a shout out.
Nice.
Prince Edward Island's not a big place, so I wish them all the success in getting open, especially opening up this year.
It's a tough time to open a brewery or own a brewery or close a brewery. It's a sucky time for everybody, and that affects everybody else. It affects you. It affects the hop suppliers, the malt suppliers, the grocery stores, everybody. Everyone's just having a weird time of it. Let's see here. What is your Kveik ring? It's on your website, the Kveik ring.
Yeah, the Kveik ring was an idea we had to try to solve the problem of having too many Kveiks that we really hadn't had any experience with. So we had this idea of, okay, why don't we carve out one propagator every month and we'll put a new Kveik into it, grow it up, make it available to pro and home brewers and get some feedback. And we've been doing that for a year now. It's been a lot of fun because we wouldn't otherwise be releasing a brand new product every single month. So it's been really cool. And the feedback from this is really useful. It's helped guide us to, which strains or which products blends are successes and which ones are duds. So that, for example, led to Crispy being developed. That led to, we're going to be regularly producing a strain called Lairdal that has a really nice sort of pineapple character. And it gives us an opportunity to pull these things out of the freezer and take them for a test drive and learn more about Kveik.
Is this something that is available only in Canada, or can people outside of Canada get access to some of these?
We do ship to the U.S. Although it's a relatively new thing. We've really been doing this in the last year or so. So we do ship to U.S. breweries, homebrew shops, and then if there's a homebrew shop that doesn't stock us, and we're still trying to add to that roster in the U.S. We also can take on bulk buys. So if you've got a group of a few homebrewers, then you can email us and put together an order, and that's a great way to get your hands on a few of these Kveik ring releases at once.
I might be willing to do something here. We could do a little pilot brew, and we could maybe also take an order in for the local homebrewers and do it out of here, somehow get it distributed. I tell you, one of the great homebrew shops is Brew Chatter in Sparks, Nevada. They're near Reno. Okay. You can reach them, brewchatter.com. My good friends RJ and Josh at Brew Chatter. They have jumped on as sponsors of this, but I tell you, the only reason I mention is because they are wonderful folks that I've been dealing with for several years. Learned about them up in Reno, and they just have a wonderful shop with great ingredients and a great thirst for knowledge and creativity. I mean, they do stuff like, they'll even do like sourdough breads. They do everything, from distilling to sourdough breads. They got it all there at Brew Chatter. So check them out, brewchatter.com. And if you get a chance, do me a favor, email customer service at brewchatter.com and tell RJ and Josh how much you appreciate that they're helping pay for the show. So John and I can continue doing the half-assery that we do.
Right.
So maybe Brew Chatter would be a great place to have some Escarpment Laboratories Kveik ring yeast. I don't know.
100%. I'll reach out. Yeah, we partner with a lot of homebrew shops up here in Canada and really value that relationship. And, especially these shops that, have a strong connection to their local communities. I really value the community aspect of homebrewing.
I can put you in touch with those guys. Like I said, I can, if there's no way to get it around here, we are in Fairfield, California, which is kind of Napa adjacent. And so that gives you an idea where we're at. I'd be happy to, take in an order if people email me and tell me they want some, and maybe we can put an order together and I'll bring it in, I'll store it in the cold box, and then people can come pick it up. I'd be fine with that. I don't. I think it'd be cool to do more with the Kveik yeast. All right, let's do this. Let's take one more short break, and when we come back, we'll wrap up talking Kveik right after this.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew strong.
Okay, we're back. We're talking Kveik and with Richard Priest from Escarpment Laboratories in Canada. They do a lot of interesting stuff with yeast. Check them out. escarpmentlaboratories.com, something like that. I don't know.
That is exactly what it is.
There you go. Good guess. But they have a lot of Kveik yeast stuff going on. Really fascinating. We're going to have Richard back on another time if I don't annoy him too much and he refuses to do the show in the future. Let's see here. Question for you. How many strains of Kveik do you think there are?
How many grains of sand are in the beach? I don't know. That is a really, really good question and a really hard question to answer. What we have seen so far is that, the deeper people dig into those individual cultures, like, so for example, the original Hornindal culture, the more you dig, the more genetic diversity, genetically distinct individuals, which we may call strains, you find. So it's a really hard question to answer, and I know that there's some research groups that are sort of working on that as well, where there's one group that I think may have gone into 40, 50, 60 colonies from a Kveik and found, okay, most of these are actually different from each other. Actually, in fact, I know that Carlsberg did that. For example, they dug into one of the Kveiks and did a pretty deep dive. So I don't have a great answer to that, because even in one of those, flakes of yeast from one of those farmers, you might have a few dozen interesting strains of yeast.
How many do you think that are known at this time?
In terms of original cultures, and again, this is sort of where I defer to Lars Marius Garzal and his Kveik registry, or his farmhouse yeast registry, as it's being called now. He's sort of keeping track of that. And I know that the number is in the 60s now. So there's 60 known traditional farmhouse cultures, not just from Norway, also from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Russia as well.
Okay. Let's see here. Where have they all come from? Are you getting, little chunks of Norwegian yeast smuggled out in somebody's underwear on a flight? Or, what exactly is the process for you to acquire these cultures?
Yeah, every so often a package shows up from Norway in a tea box, and it's full of flakes of yeast. This is literally how it happens. Our employees know that if weird mail shows up from Norway, it's for me. But we're really fortunate to have these relationships with some of the people over there who know that we're committed to studying these yeasts and sharing the good things about them. And so we are able to get a lot of these right from the source. You know, a lot of the folks, the boots on the ground in Norway, if they find a new Kveik or a new person brewing with Kveik, they'll try to split that off and send it out to a few different places for preservation and study. And so we're very lucky to be on that list.
If I was to send you a weird growth that I found here, would I put your name on it and stick it in a little box and send it?
In the brewery?
Oh, yeah, in the brewery.
Yeah, sure. I love strange microbes and figuring out what they are and what makes them tick.
No, we every year after a few freezing nights, we will do a cool ship type of inoculation out of our skylights. Remain open year round. They have louvers in them that are open all year round. And after a few freezing nights, we'll raise wort on our scissor lift up to the skylight, offering to the gods, and then we'll bring it down the next day as just raging fermentation. And we've isolated a lot of the stuff out, and it's just like it looks like a bunch of various strains that we might use here. But we've also found some strains of Brett that we think is unique. So
cool.
It's kind of fascinating, and it'll ferment. The strain of Brett we got, it'll ferment over 18% ABV, which is strong for Brett. I mean, most people say Brett will crap out around 14, but it just depends. I mean, we pushed 001 to 16.5% just recently. And it's like, yeah, I think most yeast, given the right conditions, can do a lot. And you mentioned how Kveik yeast will, ferment better in a higher gravity wort, related to, more free amino nitrogen, things like that. Have you tested the tolerance level of Kveik? Is there an upper limit for the ABV that can be attained?
We have. There are different ways of testing it.
So you guys have done everything. You guys are awesome.
Oh yeah. We try to back up our opinions with science whenever possible, but maybe the
opposite of Brew Strong. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, come on. Yeah, we have. So we did. We have tested alcohol tolerance of a lot of the Kveiks, and we basically in that experiment we went up to 16% because we assumed that we wouldn't need to go any higher, but a lot of them, just trucked along up to 16, no problem. We have not tested higher, so it's certainly possible.
I'm willing to push it. I think. Do you have an idea as to which one might be the highest alcohol tolerant?
The Hornindal is just very, very resilient across the board. Okay. So that would be a good one for sure.
Okay. All right. Here's to 25% Hornindal beer.
Yeah. I know I made a barley wine with it a couple years ago, and I know that went up to 17 or 18%.
Nice.
So yeah, pretty high octane.
Okay. How are these yeasts getting their names? There's a lot of names I really can't pronounce.
I mean, a lot of them are named after either the person that they come from or the farm, right? In general, it is Lars kind of giving them the name, usually asking the person, what do you want to call this? And so that's why they have these crazy names, because a lot of cases it's farms or people in Norway that they're named after. So yeah, if you want to throw a name at me, I can try to explain it.
No, I think that's quite fine. Are these yeasts or these cultures that are coming from these farms? Have they been there? 150, 200, 500 years? How long are these cultures been in place? Do you know?
It's really hard to date them. In terms of brewing, we know that brewing has been happening in that region for at least 400 years ago. There's yeast logs that basically were used to like stick in the wort, pick up the yeast and reuse it that date back 400 years. So I imagine they were brewing before they developed the technology to stick a log in the fermenting beer. So it's probably pretty ancient.
One of the hopes is
technology. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a technological development still. One of the hopes is that, as more yeasts get sequenced genetically and as more analysis gets done, that we can sort of use those as a molecular clock to understand how far back this goes. And that's really one of the hopes. I know there's some folks over in Norway looking to do some work on the archaeological side as well to sort of give us some better numbers as to how old this is.
All right, I got 2 quick questions. Jimmy's asking, are there certain strains that you found that work well with mixed culture, such as with Brett? Could they be pitched together and fermented at Kveik temperature, or would it be better to do lower temperatures?
Yes, we have done that. Done some experiments with mixed firm, like more traditional Berliner Weisses, but including Kveik for, I guess, a bit of a twist. We really like our Lærdal and Hornindal in that context. Seems to work pretty well in both cases with Brett. I wouldn't pitch or use Brett over 30 Celsius or 90 Fahrenheit. In our experience, it tends to start to produce some, pretty bad, garbagey flavors at those temperatures. So tend to try to keep it in the, closer to the, standard fermentation temperature range. So it could be a case where you're pitching Brett, in secondary after a Kveik primary ferment.
Unless you like those garbagey flavors. All right. One last question before we wrap it up. Where do people find your products? There's going to be a lot of people in the U.S. and internationally that are trying to find your products after the show because of the millions of listeners that are going to download this podcast. There'll be thousands, and they'll want to try out some of your products. What's the best way to go about getting them?
Absolutely. So there's a few options. If you're in Europe, the malt miller in the UK brings in our products pretty regularly, and
the malt miller.
Great.
They're going to start carrying our beers.
Oh, great!
Heritage beers.
That's awesome.
Oh.
In the U.S., we have a few homebrew clubs that have done bulk buys. We're open to that. Always happy to work with new homebrew shops as well. I know we're sort of just on the early stages of getting onboarded with U.S. homebrew shops. We literally did not have the product up until a few months ago, and we've solved a lot of those problems. So that's really exciting. So hoping to bring on more homebrew shops as well. If you're looking to buy some stuff right away, there are a couple homebrew shops in Canada that will ship over to the U.S. So one that I'll highlight here is KJ Urban Winery. They're literally around the corner from us in Guelph. Freshest possible yeast. They actually list the packaging date of the yeast on their website, and you can order it from them and get it shipped to the U.S. So you can be sure that you're getting really fresh yeast ordering through them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Richard. Appreciate you spending time with us. I think this is a great show.
Yeah.
I think if you are willing, we'd love to have you back for another show, or maybe 10. I think you have a lot of knowledge that we want to pick and we want to provide to our listeners. Thank you very much to our proud sponsors, Blickman Engineering, John at Blickman. We love you. Thank you so much for making this possible for the last 15, 16 years. Hopefully our listeners will send you an email at feedback@blickmanengineering.com and tell you how much they appreciate that you've made the show for free all this time. And check out Brew Chatter at brewchatter.com if you get a chance. Until then, everybody, brew strong.
Brew strong, everyone.